As part of the Holland Park Transformation Project, we have been interviewing people who actually attended the West Ward School that used to be located on that site. And today, we're privileged to have Bill Holland as our guest, and we will speak with him about his experiences both at the West Ward School and as a member of the Holland family. So we're delighted to have you here, and we'll begin. For the record, just state your name and when you attended the West Ward School.
I'm Bill Holland, and I went to West Ward between 1947 and 1952, kindergarten through the 4th grade.
And you had brothers and sisters who also attended?
Yes, my older sister Ruth completed West Ward, and then so did June, who is next in line. June Stokes is her name now, obviously June Holland then, and then my brother Bob Holland. What's generally not known about my brother is that when he was in the, I think, 5th grade, he missed the entire year because of pleurisy. That was back, if you will recall, Bob, you knew my dad, knew my family, and knew that TB, while it wasn't rampant, it was in the community, and Harlan Cheek had it, and my dad had it, and underwent several operations. And my brother had pleurisy, which is the infection on the outside of the lung, not the inside, and he missed the entire 5th grade. And the interesting thing about that is that when Bob and I talk about it, he says my mother was told, keep him out of school. She said, and my dad was in the hospital then with TB. My mother said, no way, the boy's going to school. Or he can't go to school, but she bought homework assignments to him every day. He finished the 5th grade with all A's, and she had bought him a microscope. And he believed that if he could just see something through that microscope, he could understand the universe. And that's a part of what propelled him to excellence later on in life.
Okay.
And I like to tell that story because Bob doesn't tell it very often.
Okay. Now, when I knew you, you lived on Center Street. Was that always where you resided?
That's what my folks tell me. I think we moved there when I was very, 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 very young and don't remember the move.
Okay.
But yes, I grew up at 619 West Center Street. That was my universe for all my growing up years.
Yeah. Speaking of West Ward as a school, and I know it's been a long time, but to the best of your ability, can you recall what a routine day would be like in elementary school?
Yeah, in elementary, we would. Well, first of all, you had one teacher, as in most schools, doing everything, and I remember it being a fairly, in retrospect, resource-poor school. Now that's not crying wolf after the fact. It was just a place that didn't have very many resources. You had 4 teachers in the whole school: Holmes, Biggs, Stewart, and someone else that and Ferguson. Oh my goodness, how could I forget Miss Ferguson? But anyway, it was a fairly pleasant experience from the standpoint of it was like going to an extension of your family. I mean, because they knew you, they knew your family, they kind of knew what the rules were, you knew what the rules were, and it was a pretty interesting kind of experience from that standpoint.
Okay. So you've named all your teachers. What do you remember most about class activities? Anything that was outstanding that occurred?
Yeah. When we were younger, we used to lay on rugs and sleep. We had figs and milk. And what I don't remember, which I think my kids will remember from their school years. I have 2 kids and 5 grandchildren. Are subjects. I mean, I don't recall any of the great subjects that my grandkids and kids are experiencing. Now, maybe as they grow into adulthood, that part of their memory will lapse as well. But I don't remember any science. I barely remember any math. Some penmanship.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Miss Biggs.
Miss Biggs with the penmanship.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the curiosity about the world that I later developed, or that my dad had. I mean, while we were home.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Do you remember not necessarily experiencing, but witnessing any kind of discipline?
Yes, and this is another one of those stories. I don't know if anybody knows, but I cannot tell you the teacher's name. I think it was Miss Stewart. I've often marveled, and in fact, I feel the same way about your mother, because I would sit and talk to her occasionally just about hard times, and she would always share a little bit. I remember a teacher hit me with a ruler, and I hit her back. I don't know how old I was, but I got to tell you, I wasn't old enough. So she sends me home with this note. And my mother comes home after working 2 jobs, I might add. She said, "What's this? First of all, what are you doing home? Why aren't you in school? And well, what is this all about?" I handed her a note. She says, "Is this true? Did you hit," and I can't remember her name, I think it was Miss Stewart, but I'm not sure. I don't want to be unfair to her. And I said, "Yes, I did." I said, "Because she hit me." So my mother gave me the appropriate spanking, didn't say a word, marched me back up to the school without telling me what to say. She said, "Billy," which everybody at LB calls me, "has something he wants to say to you." I'm sorry. Never happened again, I assure you. and I get choked up when I say that. Then my mother turned to her and said, "If he needs to be hit, you call him. It's not your job, it's my job." That was one of the great disciplinary experiences I remember. And I've as my own kids, who ended up playing basketball for pedophiles, I might add. When they went and played basketball, always at the beginning of the basketball season, had a conversation with the coach. This is not a situation in which you need to be their dads. I'm not asking you to be their father. It's my job.
Right.
And you need to understand the difference between those two. And as long as we got that straight, it was terrific.
Yeah. Good. Other than the teachers, were you aware of, any other staff like the custodian or visiting teachers that came from the high school, for example?
I was aware that we occasionally got someone from the college. I was not aware of any visiting teachers from elsewhere. I certainly was aware of the custodial staff because that was Mr. Hall, who lived 2 doors down from me, and his daughter was Jackie, and his son was Josie and Don and Cynthia, and so having Mr. Hall in the school was like an extension of the house. I mean, we'd go fishing on the weekend, and during the week he was a janitor at the school.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have other than Mr. Hall? Did you have any contact with your teachers outside of school?
Only Miss Ferguson. Miss Ferguson would take us in the summertime to Bible study in Jackson.
Okay.
And so during the summer, a part of my summer was devoted to church school. And that's the only contact we ever had. In fact, I remember no contact with teachers outside school.
Okay. What about outdoor activities, sports, things that took place at school? Recess?
Recess. I got an A in recess.
Didn't we?
Did very good, yes. I remember recess with great fondness. Oh, there is one other thing I recall. I remember I heard a speech by George Will, and he talked about the tragedy in the black community and why one of the reasons that more black kids aren't playing is because the fathers aren't home teaching the kids baseball, and baseball is a sport that requires a father. And I said, here goes George Will again. Doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. He's not even close. In fact, speaking of sports in Albion, I recall very clearly the gym teacher coming up. I can't remember his name, but he had a tattoo of his girlfriend's name on his knuckles, and then he married somebody else, so he had to get all that off. But I recall with Mr. Sikarsky and a number of other people in the summer having an abundance of recreational activities on the playgrounds at West Ward and at Victory Park as we needed them. And I don't recall very many parents attending those games or those, because what? They were working. They didn't have, I mean, you know, Will's got this middle class view of what parenting is like, and I've seen no indication that he, pardon my French, knows what the hell he's talking about. And Will was one of my mentors in college, so I say that with fondness to my old friend, but with disdain for his understanding of the black community, as usual.
Yeah. Well, switching from play to food, what do you remember about lunch at school? Did you eat lunch at school, or did you, since you were close, did you walk home for lunch?
I walked home, and it was just, this is a real bad memory. Not because of the people involved, but because of the circumstance. We would go home and literally get bologna and bread, and we would make our sandwiches at noontime. And when it seemed appropriate, we would have tomato soup. It took me years before I could look bologna in the eye again. Because I tell you, we had that every day, and every day it was put it on the bill. Now, that didn't make Bob Pearson a bad guy, but that's how that community, and I imagine a lot of other people, were simply living hand to mouth. There's just not very much money.
Do you remember anything about the building itself at West Ward? Like, do you remember it as being cheerful, being gloomy? What?
I can spare you that. How about gloomy?
I just want.
Yeah, it was a pretty gloomy building. Like, even back then, it kind of smelled of. I'm not quite sure what that smell was, but I don't recall it being a pleasant smell. You know how sometimes you go in a place and they're having a cafeteria and you kind of get a whiff of the aroma throughout the building. Well, West Ward never had any aroma associated with it that I could remember. But it was a pretty gloomy, pedestrian, almost military in its drabness.
Okay. Did you ever notice anything about the physical condition of the building? Things that were in need of repair but not done?
The building was in constant need of repair. I mean, I remember there were mice in the building. I remember it being drafty. In fact, I remember one day in particular, a mouse ran through the classroom, and Billy Whitehead took one of the boots out of the closet and nailed it going across the room. I was really impressed with that. I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't ever remember any rat feces or anything like that. It wasn't that kind of filth.
Right.
But in the bathrooms, and maybe this is a perennial school problem, but the bathrooms always smell of urine. Always smell of urine. So that's what I remember about West Ward.
Did you ever have an occasion to go into the basement? Do you have any recollection of being in
I
the
would
basement?
have been afraid to go in the basement.
Okay.
I couldn't imagine that. Now maybe this is through the goggles of an adult, but I can't imagine there was anything in that basement there that I'd be interested in.
And no memory, like in summer when there was recreation.
Yes.
Do you don't recall there being some kind of little ring for boxing that was inside?
No.
The basement.
Well, first of all, I never went in the basement, but what I recall is that there was the building had two entrances either side, and it had 4 classrooms to it. And on the side of the building, the side toward Cass Street, was some kind of shed that you would go into the building underneath. But I never got past the entrance to the shed.
Okay.
There's testimony to my lack of courage.
All right, let's talk about the closing of the school. And what, if any, memories you have of things leading up to that?
Well, I remember enough to know that my memory is selective. That what I recall of it, and once again, let me qualify this by saying I am sure there are other people who have a different set of memories. But I recall Mike Wallace and I. Mike was a white guy who, and he's one of those guys, funny about Albie, never thought of Mike as a white guy. I thought of Mike as a buddy of mine. I mean, we kind of ran around together and did this and did that. Mike was later killed in an automobile accident. But Mike Wallace and I were on the grounds up there, and my dad had just gotten home from the hospital, and he asked me. He said, where's it come time for you to go to school? Mike went one way to Dalrymple, and I went another way. And my dad said, well, what's going on? I said, well, from what I understand, he goes over there because that's the white school. Even though, which was funny, because Austin had plenty of African Americans, I don't know, plenty of African Americans going to. So it was just the town's way of maintaining as much segregation as they could maintain. And I thought my dad, I recall, kind of organized a meeting, got a bunch of people concerned about it, posted signs at night saying close the school, and that was the beginning, and withheld us from school. And that was the beginning of me transferring to Westward, from Westward to Dalrymple in my 5th grade year.
Okay. Once you transferred, how different did Dalrymple seem?
Well, it seemed radically different because, in fact, Bob, that is a great question because I have vivid memories, and there are two in particular that drive home the point. One was Mrs. Duckworth, who was a wonderful teacher as far as I'm concerned, whose husband was a colonel in the Air Force, and she would read to us. And that's why I got introduced to Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House on the Prairie. And that was just great. I mean, I couldn't wait. I mean, I would go to school and say, hurry up, reading time, get here. Because I couldn't wait to figure out what would happen next, kind of thing. So that was very exciting. And that wasn't happening a lot in Westward. It just wasn't happening a lot. I don't know who to blame or who not to blame, but that began to open my eyes. But the other, speaking of Mrs. Duckworth, and to this day, I'm just sorry that I didn't stay in touch with her a little bit more. I had one of the girls on the playground, Verna, whatever Verna was. Verna's claim to fame was that she had 6 toes. And she lived in I just thought that's where she lived, but she lived in a mud house on Dalrymple Street. And she called me, no, she didn't call me, she described something in inappropriate terms. And I was going to whip her ass. I'm in the 5th grade. So Mrs. Duckworth got in the middle of it, and she said, this isn't going to happen. You got to understand that. So school ended. I'm being held after class so I don't do something stupid. And everybody goes off. And afterward, Mrs. Duckworth comes up to me and she says, I am so proud of you. Wow. That was, so the point is that there was a tension there that was just below the surface. This poor girl happened to give voice to it. And because of a great teacher, she handled it very well.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about your life within your home a little bit. Like growing up, like did you have chores? Were there rules about things?
Yeah, and my mother, just absolutely wonderful. She worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs. She would come home and never could quite figure this out, why we weren't more involved. And she would cook, you know, because that's what she thought women did, you know. And I mean, she really had it hard. And I had chores back then that seemed like they were unfair burdens, burdens of responsibility. And one of them was to mop the floor, you know, once a week. And it's so funny because my brother mopped half the floor, I mopped the other half. You couldn't have drawn a straighter line down that floor if you had tried. You know, it was an engineering marvel that you never did more than what you had to. But basically, I mean, God, we grew up with a with no bathroom. We had to take a bath in the in a wash tub.
Galvanized tub.
Galvanized tub.
Yeah.
And that was, you know,
Standard fare.
Standard fare. And well, I still, when I delivered papers, there were people who still didn't have running toilets. They had outdoor toilets. But, you know, I think that wasn't, that was no big deal, I guess, back then, is what I'm saying. But yeah, we had chores. And I also don't remember any time during my high school years in which I didn't have at least a job.
I was going to ask about that. You mentioned a paper route.
I had a paper route. I worked at the local bakery.
Which one? Was it the one that's next to the alley?
No, it's not the other one. It was the one up toward the railroad tracks.
Okay.
Yeah, Fred, whatever Fred's last name was.
Was it Behrman?
Behrman, Fred Behrman. Yeah, that was Fred.
And the other one was
Albion Baker.
Yeah, Ivan Slaughter.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because Ivan made the best French bread still
Oh,
that I've ever had.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's still open?
No, it closed in the '60s.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So yeah, I certainly had chores and had a job, and one of the mistakes I made as a parent is that I didn't demand the same thing from my kids. They started playing. It was normal. I mean, I played basketball, football, ran track, baseball, participated in debate, sprang speech, and student government. Now, outside of the fact that that's too much, but I never insisted that my kids do any of that, and had jobs. And I think, you know, they've told me in retrospect that was a mistake, and I agree with them.
Yeah. And you talked about your mother and father. In terms of organizations, are you aware of any organizations that they belong to?
Yeah, my mother was Order of the Eastern Star. My dad was, what is that organization? Certainly not Knights of Columbus.
Mason.
Mason was a Mason. And in fact, he was the speech giver. You know, the one guy who at funerals gives the speeches or induction ceremonies. He was good at it. He was a good public speaker. Very good.
Now, your father also had a little newspaper, right?
No, he worked for a newspaper.
Okay, what was that paper?
It was the I can't remember, but it was more like a weekly.
Weekly, yeah.
And he had a column that ran it.
So he was just contributing.
He was a contributor. That's right.
Okay.
That's exactly
Okay.
Right. Yeah, he didn't know.
Did he ever discuss what he planned to do or what he was working on? I mean, was that normal?
No, my dad was not big on, gee, son, I love you, or let's talk about doing this. I mean, and not only was he not big on it, he wasn't very good at it. And so there were very few conversations that allowed for an easy transfer of knowledge, and I think that's a parenting thing that you learn. When I married my wife, one of the things she brought to that union was a much greater patience than I got from my dad about dealing with kids, and that was very good. My mother, on the other hand, it's really funny because I don't think I've ever told you this. Your mother too.
They remind me of each other.
Yeah, really, yeah.
Yeah.
When I came home from college, I couldn't wait to get a pot of coffee and sit down and just talk to my mom.
Yeah.
Just, gee, mom, what are you doing and what's going on? And you couldn't have tied my dad down for 5 seconds with that kind of idle banter. I mean,
Yeah, that's the way he would see that.
Gee, you remember him, huh? Yeah. And quite honestly, I don't hold that against him. I mean, he had his job to do, and he did it.
Yeah. In terms of their activism in the community, do you remember the kinds of things they were involved in, like desegregating the Bohm, opening up the skating rink, and in particular, your dad's involvement with urban renewal? Do you have any?
The real answer is not very much, but by then, keep in mind, it's 1952. Eisenhower's running against Stevens. And I remember my dad having a very specific point of view about that. And that's a point of view that he shared with us. And just one other thing, and I don't want to end up selling my dad short or selling his legacy short. One of the other things my dad used to do, and to this day I really appreciate, is he would read poetry to us. Yeah, which is something most people don't know about him. And there's one poem in particular called the Vagabond House. When I have a house, as I sometimes may, I'll suit my fancy in every way. I'll fill it with things that have caught my eye, and drifting from Iceland to Malolokai. Oh, it won't be corrected in period of style, but oh, I've thought for a long. I go on and on and on and on. But he would pretend as though he's reading it.
Yeah.
He was reciting it from memory because he knew it all. And from the standpoint of public speaking and understanding poetry, and being hostile about the way we were treated, he understood those things very well. Having said that, and this always surprised me about him, he would say, "You haven't lived till you've heard an Irish tenor sing Danny Boy." It's just, he had that kind of largesse of appreciation that's difficult to explain, and I don't know that it needs an explanation. But it's,
So, with regard to the Bohm Theater, do you have any memory of your families being involved in that?
Not. I know they were against it. I know they were afraid that if their kids went down there and acted up, that we would get ourselves in trouble, and that of all of us, I would be the one who would do that. But I do remember talking about it. Let me tell you what I didn't know. What I didn't know is that the grandparents of one of my classmates owned the theater. Had I known that, I would have had a little different attitude. And I mean, she knows who she is, and I've never talked to her about that. But if I ever get a chance, I'm not sure I would, because I'm not sure it's necessary to rub salt in a wound retroactively. Probably would not be a smart thing to do.
Yeah.
So I'd probably pass on that, but it's not something that I discovered with great pleasure.
You come from a remarkable family.
So do you.
Yeah, true. But I think sometimes people wonder about the nature of conversation within a home of so many successful people, and if in fact there were conversations about your future and planning and all of that.
The real answer is yes, but they didn't take place as directives. I remember when you went to Youngstown University, and I knew you growing up, And there was never any doubt in my mind that you would go to college, having spoken with your mother, or that you would study music. There's no doubt in my mind. And so you ask yourself the question, how did that happen? It's kind of in the water, it's in the air. I mean, and when you go to college, Bobby, as opposed to you have a choice or an option, it's something you had to work through. And I recall you got out of high school, went and worked in the factory for a while to get enough money to do it, and then went off to college. I recall that. Not quite that way.
But yeah, close.
You came out and went in. Okay. Same was with me. Same was is with my kids, which again I think is not the best thing in the world. But given Ruth's accomplishments, given June's tenderness of heart, Bob's belief that he can conquer the universe by looking through a microscope, there's no doubt about what the rest of us were going to do. We were going to participate in debate, and we were going to be athletes, and we were going to be, and it was not something I thought about, thank goodness, because I probably would have screwed it up.
Yeah. We talk to people about growing up in Albion, and if looking back, can you actually identify some highlights or things that stand out in your experiences here?
Oh, absolutely, Bob. I mean, that's the easiest thing in the world. First of all, being friends with you and James Sanders at a very tender age, in which you guys, James was Order of the Arrow. I recall you didn't do that, but you took your scouting responsibilities very seriously, and you guys kind of dragged me along to, I was kind of like the young, and that was important to be around guys who not so much serious-minded, but people who were willing to work hard, who could focus, who were looking to accomplish something. I remember one of the saddest days I had as a kid when we went hunting that bird with the bow and arrow. I mean, that was just not. We wouldn't kill the bird because we all had bows.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a reasonable thing to do until we hit the bird. We just said to ourselves, "What are we doing?" But the fact that we figured that out.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things were highlights. And then after I went on from there, I grew up with the belief that there was probably nothing I couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I go to Michigan State on football scholarship. I compete very well. I get injured, turn around, convert it to academic pursuit, get a PhD. Quit that after a while, go into business. I mean, I was a little bit, if my kids had done that, I would be going crazy. I mean, because those are high risk activities. But yeah, no, I just grew up with that kind of optimism in myself.
Okay. This is, in terms of your personal experiences, I know you worked for Mayor Koch for a while.
Oh, that was a lot of fun.
And you were at PepsiCo.
Yeah.
And I know you were at University of California, Riverside, when you came back to MSU as
as a president professor.
Yeah. What else have you done?
I'll tell you, the thing I think I'm most excited about is the people will remember or not remember that there's a time in American life where you can have a job today and get fired tomorrow, which is a sea change in how people treated work, especially white collar workers. And so when I went through all these mergers and acquisitions, I kept getting downside. I call it downsized with money. Every time somebody bought us out, if you remember the executive group, they just bought you out and paid you more money, which was really, really terrific. I mean, I kind of like that. But the thing that I've kind of been most excited about lately is that I leave Right Management, in which I'm managing all the offices for Right Management west of Cleveland and in Canada. It's about $200 million worth of business, which is a nice chunk of business to handle. It's a consulting business. I was excited about it. We get bought out, and I leave, and I'm thinking, now what are you going to do now? And since that happened, 7 years ago, I've written 4 books. chronicling my experiences and offering advice to parents who are trying to get their kids on the path to careers that make sense. That's been exciting. I've enjoyed that. I've written those books.
Okay, something you want to ask?
Yes.
Those are great questions.
So talk some about the sense of segregation in Albion growing up. Bob mentioned the Bohm Theater. Did you go to the Bohm and have to sit in the balcony?
Well, it was really interesting. The answer is yes. And here is my attitude about all of those experiences related to race. They were unnecessary insults. And that's it. Unnecessary insults. You can get angry about them, but you need to survive them. You can let them go, but you need to survive letting them go. There are a lot of things you can do with that. As they say, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. Of course, I know there's some people who will use that to want to keep up, that kind of thing. But the thing that I am concerned about around those issues have to do with wasting people's talents because someone else doesn't get it. And that bothers me. It really does. It bothers me that a store owner that's selling to the public think they can make individual choices around who they sell to and who they don't. As if the environment that's created is something they don't have to pay back to the larger society. I think it's a misunderstanding of capitalism. You know, it's really funny, everybody keeps talking about Adam Smith, so I wouldn't have read the book. You know what Adam Smith says about the wealthy? Tax the hell out of them, because they're never going to have enough money. They will always find reason to want more under the name of freedom. So I don't worry about those people who are worried about the destruction of capitalism. That's kind of where all that leads.
Follow up with your educational experience in Albion after West Ward and Dalrymple. What was it like at Washington Gardner? Did you have teachers that were encouraging? Did you have teachers that were discouraging?
Yeah, but if you haven't, I mean, you probably can sense it now. People that discouraged me, I tried to make irrelevant, and they make them irrelevant. And I'm sure I'll give you a good example. Ethel Fleenor had the biggest heart in the world, and she was my sister's debate teacher. Wonderful, wonderful debate teacher. Had traditional attitudes about race that were not very well informed. What do you do with that? You make them irrelevant. And that's how that works. It takes a strength of spirit to do that, but that's the way you do it. Ellsworth Anderson, great. I mean, a teacher gave me a F once in one of her classes, trying to make me ineligible for a game. Anderson, and I won't say who it was, but Anderson came to me and said, "You've been given an F." Now you got to realize, in the whole of Washington Gardner High School, I may have had 4 grades below an A, maybe 5. And here this F shows up on my report card. Doesn't make sense, you know. And he just said, "I'll take care of it." And I got some sense of what he did. He went into the principal and said, "Look, you don't want to do this. I'm just telling you now, this is not where we want to go with this." But yeah, sure, there were people who encouraged me and discouraged me, or tried to discourage me.
And your experiences growing up in Albion with Albion College, the boundaries, the opportunities, comment on Town and Gown in your day?
Yeah, it was there. I mean, and it's great to come back and see that you have a faculty and an administration that understands that we live in a community, and that the least of us is no lesser than the best of us. That's big. That's big. Because it's not a concept I use every day. But people deserve to be treated like people. And it's hard for some people to do that. Myself included. I mean, I'm not immune to that kind of thing.
In, I think the 1970s, Lily, maybe it's Lily Geyer, wrote a piece in the Free Press.
Know Lily very well.
About you don't have to be from Albion to be a success,
But it
helps. And of course featured many of your contemporaries and your family, but referenced the idea that there was a strong family center in Albion African American community, and I know some of your comments have spoken to that, but just maybe elaborate a little bit about.
Sure. This actually is something I've written about but haven't published, and maybe after I get rich and famous, I'll get it published. There is a history here of people, a whole generation, a whole class of people, both black and white, achieving more than what their parents achieved. Their parents came here to work, and they weren't middle class parents. Mr. Morgan wasn't middle class, and I can go on. I mean, there weren't very many degrees. Kit Cartwright's dad owned the shoe store. Brian Hampton's dad was here at the college. All of these people really did very well in life by traditional standards. And it was a time of full employment, which shows you how important that is in the scheme of things. And it was an opportunity for parents to be parents because they weren't hungry. They could feed their families. And that is so critically important. And they did a good job of it. I remember Vaughn Washington. People forget about Vaughn Washington, who was down in Western Michigan University. Vaughn came from a family of 16 people, got a PhD, and retired as a full professor at the University of Michigan. Billy Talbert became a lieutenant colonel in the Army. These people were not from great paragons of middle class virtue. And I can go on, on and on and on. Albion has some virtue to it that deserves to be explored, and that's why I'm pleased that you guys are doing this.
I have a quick question. One's a housekeeping question from the earlier in the interview. Was it the Journal of Albion that
Journal
we
of
were
Albion,
reaching
thank you.
for?
Yes, yeah, very good.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to be sure that we cover is how did your family end up in Albion? How did they happen to arrive here, and from where?
Very simply, we were a part of that great migration, 1919, 1918. And of course, the automobile industry played a major role because they are subcontracting to the Albion Malleable Iron Company to get manufacturing and to a few others. And there was a scarcity of labor. So, and one other thing I want to say about Albion that I don't hear a lot about, they're not just blacks in Albion as a minority group. They're Jews. They're Russian Jews in particular. They're Catholics who got here pretty much the same way, in which they sent the buses to Pensacola, Florida, sent them to New York City. When the people got off the boat, they loaded them on, brought them here, built them housing, and gave them jobs. And it seemed like a good thing to do because they needed labor. And people say, well, they had a self-interest in it. But look at the difference between the system in the South, in which they made it illegal for those people to leave. That when they got caught on the levees, they let them drown rather than let them go. That's the difference. And it's a difference of great measure, not a small measure. So my family got it the same way. We are, Lewis Chapel AME is the first black church in Albion. It was founded by the family that raised my mother, the Gants, and that's how we got here. Thank you for following up on that. That's something that people wouldn't know.
That's good information. And your father worked where when you were young?
My father was in the hospital most of the time being operated on. He worked at Yale Manufacturing, which I just vaguely remember. Then he got TB, and then did not have physical labor job after that. Smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day.
What do you remember about the atmosphere of the factories? Because the Gale was right by West Ward, and of course the Malleable was close by.
About the Malleable, I remember that it was the last few jobs in America where people went to work and had to take a bath when they came home because you got dirty doing that. The Gale Manufacturing Company, I remember I laughed because in retrospect it's funny. It wasn't funny when it was happening. During certain times of day, you couldn't hang clothes on the line because the cinders and the soot was all over the neighborhood. I couldn't believe it. You couldn't look up; you'd get it in your eye. Yeah. So I certainly remember that. And then that being said, the guy who ran the Gale Manufacturing Company, I think his name was Abbott, gave me a summer job when I went to Michigan State. He knew Duffy Doherty, and Duffy said, "Can you get him a job during the summer?" And so that's how that worked out.
So you worked at the Gale?
I worked at the Gale cutting weeds out back. One other story I'd like to make sure we try to get on at least. My mother was a football fan, and if you were going to be in our house on Sunday afternoon when the Lions were on, there was only one requirement: that you shut up. You could cheer, but you couldn't talk. You couldn't carry out other activities. So she was a real football fan. So I'm playing and beginning to get some notoriety. It's my senior year. I've got scholarship offers from Michigan, Dartmouth, and a few other places. And I get injured. And I'm on the field, and the ambulance takes me to the hospital. And I go to the hospital. It's the first quarter. Wait there a couple, 3 hours. My mother shows up. I said, "Where you been?" She said, "It was a great game." I asked her about that. I said, "Hey, what was that?" She said, "Well, once I found out you were okay, there's no sense in me leaving the game." Can you imagine that? So.
Did Albion College recruit you in any way?
Albion College had about as much chance of recruiting me as a man in the moon. I mean, that just wasn't going to happen.
And because you knew the level of athletics that you were interested in and qualified for.
Yeah, right.
Well, I have to ask this question because your sister told this story when she spoke at the Bohm Theater.
Well, my sister
about your mother integrating the Bohm because she had to take one of the smaller children.
Yes,
to,
that was me.
And, well, that's what I wondered, if you were the one she had to
sit
tie
in
to
the
the
seat.
chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, I just wanted to be sure we
Well, no,
got
she used
that
to
for the
clean
record.
the Bohm Theater.
Yeah.
She cleaned it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
That was how she told the story, but she did tell of the young one of her siblings being sort of tied to the chair while her mother worked, and that was how they integrated the downstairs of the Bohm.
That's a good example of a noble lie.
I love the story.
It may have happened, but it had nothing to do with integrating that theater.
I unintentional.
Yeah.
It seems like when I was doing some stuff on industries in Albion that when I did Corning, that your mother worked at Corning?
Yes.
And
Mhm.
did she have a good experience there from your mother?
On balance, I would have to say she did. My mother was a painfully honest woman, just like his mother. I mean, they were cut from the same cloth. And she would, it was a good experience because when she had an opportunity to misappropriate funds, that is, she caught somebody embezzling, she just turned it in. When I got operated on by the Michigan State doctors, I thought it was great. Oh, these guys are looking after my knee. I want to be careful because Michigan State's treated me very well. What I thought was kindness, in retrospect, they wanted to see how solid the knee was. So they performed the operation. So. But I remember that.
I had one more question that I wanted to be sure got on the record. Go ahead. Keep talking. I kind of lost it.
Well, we're talked out, so.
Also, you ask everybody those questions?
Yeah, I combined, this is a new one I did. This is what I use for everybody. This one I did for you. And, but it's because I wasn't sure about how long you had been at Westmore. And so I didn't want to just ask you a lot of needless stuff about Westmore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
How does my recollection differ or the same as what other people have said?
I think it coincides with some debate, like on the question about whether it was gloomy or not. There were a small number of you who said that, and so you agree with at least 4 out of the 19. But otherwise, I mean, the staffing, everything's pretty consistent. And I was hoping there would be some, everything wouldn't be exactly the same. Now I do have, that brings up one thing.
Oh, here we go. Now, I'll tell you, this is probably some money I owe him.
No,
I know what it
no, this is about, this is a question that I was really keen on. When we were growing up, and my sister reminded me of this, there was a story that they used to scare us away from being on the playground after dark. And there was this story about an old woman and her pigs, maybe 7 pigs. And that if you stayed and played at Westport after sundown, this woman and her pigs would come and chase you.
Is that right?
Did you ever hear that story?
No, because you know where I was at sundown. I was home. It's so funny because the answer is, that's the first time I've ever heard that. But what that reminds me of is that by the time you were busy, and I was definitely busy, I have no idea how I did all that stuff. But I remember saying to myself in the 11th grade or 12th grade, boy, am I glad my mother makes me go to bed at 9:30, because I wouldn't have made it. I mean, when 9:30 came, buddy, I was ready.
You were ready.
I was absolutely, positively ready. And I remember the poor girl in Albion, who later was younger than I am, I think maybe Rodney's class, died of mono. There was somebody who died of mononucleosis.
Wow.
She just got overextended. And when you're a teenager full of energy,
Yeah.
that's, in fact, the other thing, speaking of teenagers, which we now understand, you say, oh, that boy is always asleep. Well, as it turns out, teenagers need more sleep. And I didn't realize that, So I hope you don't sense that I have negative memories of Albion.
No,
Okay, because that's not what I'm trying to get across.
not at all.
I have a quick question. That just because it's probably been said, but out of my hearing, you've mentioned Bob's mother a number of times, and I guess my question is, and I'm guessing that she was your music teacher.
No, she was. First of all, I had no musical acumen.
Okay.
Ruth doesn't either. The only one that had any musical skills at all was June. But I knew she taught music. You gotta realize that when we're Boy Scouts, and I'm really looking up to these guys, and I'm trailing them around like a little puppy dog, and we would invariably end up at Bob's house, or just like as a way station between on the way to going somewhere. She always had a kind word and a soft voice to go with it when she spoke with me. And in retrospect, I know they were poor.
Absolutely.
And that's right. But where the images of poverty that we see on television had no relevance to that family, because it didn't exist. It was kindness, it was thoughtfulness, it was being soft-spoken, there was an emphasis on doing the right thing, and I could go home and get the same thing from my mother. That's not so much rare as it is not publicized. I have a little section in the book. There's a little book that I just wrote about parents, and I say, you will find that inner city parents love their kids just as much, if not more, than middle class parents. It's just not reported. And I've gotten to the point to where I resent these descriptions of African Americans that are based on nothing other than images and ignorance, which is a tough thing to base images and ignorance. And there's a lot of that going around. And the reason I mentioned George Will is I want to get it out, what I think of his non-racist perspective. I don't think it's racist, just think it's a bunch of images based on ignorance.
That's one of the things that we noticed a lot, and you mentioned Von Washington, and in particular, he brought out the real loss when the school was finally not there, that it was kind of a center to a community, and that once the community dispersed in with that and urban renewal and that kind of breakdown of a core to the community. And that's one of the things that we've all been keeping in mind while we're working on the transformation of the park. Mm-hmm. That core part of a community is essential to having kind of parenting of all the children in the neighborhood, as you found in Robert's mother and
yes and no.
Okay.
And the no part of that is that any change is going to destroy a core of something. And the unkept secret, or the well-kept secret, in this society about African Americans, that we are not one people. We never have been. Not even close. We come from different tribes. What makes us, at our core, who we are, is a common set of experiences. Don't mean to underestimate that. But it's not by accident that Jamaicans come to this country and experience something very different and do something very different. It's not by accident Barbadians come to this country and behave in a much different kind of way. And I could go on. There are ethnic groups within the black community that are never accounted for. That's why the Hispanics laugh at us when we talk about Hispanics. They think that's the funniest damn thing in the world. Because they know there's no such thing. And the Cubans just like the Colombians as much as the Puerto Ricans just like the Cubans. So what makes them Hispanics is a common core of experiences that when you take that away, some of that core falls apart. Is that good or bad? You tell me.
Did you mention that George Will was a mentor for you?
Yeah, I worked. I won the when I was at James Madison College. I won the first Excellence in Teaching Award that Michigan State ever gave. And George couldn't get away from the University of Toronto, I think, to teach the first 5 weeks of the class. It was a class on political theory, contemporary political theory. So he asked Herb Garfinkel, could he recommend someone who could do the first 5 weeks to give the students a grounding in traditional liberal theory, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and so I did that and won that that award for it. It was a great experience. I really.
And so then when he actually arrived, you worked with him?
Well, no, when he actually arrived, I sat down and took notes and fed back to him what he wanted. There was no democracy in any of that, no.
But you did have a semester with him, yeah.
Well, more than a semester. He and I were pretty good friends.
Yeah.
He really liked me. He wrote me an unsolicited letter of recommendation when he left. He did something else, which I think I'll never forgive him for. We had one of these mass 150 people in the class. And he calls me up one night. He says, "You got a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "You know those 75 blue books you were going to read?" Because he wouldn't give multiple choice, all essay question. He says, "You now have 150. I said, "Would you explain to me, we got 2 TAs, I'm one and he's one, why I got 150 essays to read?" He says, "I don't trust the other guy."